Out of 40,000 men who crewed German U-boats during World War II, roughly 30,000 never came home. They terrorized the Atlantic, sank thousands of Allied ships, and nearly choked Britain into submission. But their success came at a price few could imagine. This is the story of what it was really like to serve aboard a U-boat, why 3 out of every 4 crewmen died, and why it remains one of the most horrifying assignments in military history. Before they became the terror of the Atlantic, German submarines had to prove they could even work. In 1850, Wilhelm Bauer designed Germany's first submersible, the Brandtaucher. During a test dive in 1851, it promptly sank. Bauer and his 2 crewmen barely escaped with their lives, but submarine development continued slowly and painfully. By the early 1900s, Germany had refined the concept. Unable to match Britain's massive battleship fleet, German strategists pivoted to a cheaper, more ruthless approach. They would attack merchant shipping with submarines and starve Britain of resources. By the outbreak of World War I, Germany had 28 U-boats ready for action. Within weeks, U-9 torpedoed 3 British cruisers in under an hour, killing over 1,400 sailors. Naval warfare had changed forever. These early U-boats were primitive by later standards. They operated mostly on the surface, diving only to attack or escape. Diesel engines powered surface travel and charged batteries for brief underwater runs at crawling speeds. They had to surface frequently, making them vulnerable to attack. At first, U-boat commanders followed prize rules. They would stop merchant vessels, allow crews to evacuate, and then sink the ships. This gentlemanly conduct ended when the British deployed Q-ships. These were merchant vessels, disguised with hidden weapons that lured submarines to their destruction. After several commanders were killed, the rules changed, and what followed was unrestricted submarine warfare. That meant attacking any ship without warning. The most infamous victim was the RMS Lusitania, torpedoed in May 1915, with nearly 1,200 people killed, including 128 Americans. The attack pushed the United States closer to entering the war, which would ultimately doom Germany's chances. By war's end, U-boats had sunk over 5,000 ships, but at a cost of 178 U-boats and nearly 5,000 crewmen dead. This was only the beginning. After World War I, the Treaty of Versailles explicitly banned Germany from building submarines. The Germans, displaying their characteristic respect for international treaties, immediately started looking for loopholes. They established submarine design offices in neutral countries, officially building boats for foreign navies while secretly perfecting their own designs. In 1935, Hitler openly rejected the treaty and announced Germany would rearm. Admiral Karl Donitz, meanwhile, was developing a revolutionary new tactic. Instead of submarines hunting alone, groups of U-boats would coordinate attacks to overwhelm convoy escorts. The Wolf Pack was born. By World War II, the Type 7 had become Germany's workhorse submarine. At 220 feet long, it could travel over 8,500 nautical miles without refueling. It could dive to depths around 750 feet in emergencies, though they typically operated between 300 and 500 feet. Even at normal depths, hulls creaked and leaked under pressure, and emergency dives to maximum depth often resulted in terrifying mechanical failures. Germany's strategy was simple but devastating. Sink every ship carrying fuel, food, weapons, or troops to Britain. Strangle the island and force surrender without ever needing an invasion. Dozens of U-boats slipped into the Atlantic, stalking slow merchant convoys. One sunken freighter meant thousands of tons of supplies gone. The war was barely hours old when the first strike came. On the same day Britain declared war, U-30 torpedoed the passenger liner SS Athenia, killing over 100 civilians. The Germans claimed it was a mistake, but the message was clear. No one was safe. The Royal Navy initially underestimated the threat. They believed the convoy system, radar, and depth charges would be enough. What they did not expect was how coordinated and lethal the U-boats had become. By the end of 1939, dozens of merchant ships already littered the Atlantic seabed. During the day, U-boats would patrol shipping lanes submerged, Once a convoy was spotted, they would track it from a distance. At night, they would move in closer to attack. Most U-boats carried a deck gun, usually 88mm or 105mm, useful for finishing off damaged ships without wasting torpedoes. But as Allied air coverage improved, surfacing became increasingly suicidal. The real weapon was the torpedo. Using just optics and mathematics, crews calculated a target's course, speed, and bearing. Then they worked out a firing solution by hand. No computers, no guidance systems. The torpedo officer would adjust for angle, distance, and spread, then launch. The G7A steam torpedoes were fast, but left a visible wake. The G7E electric torpedoes were slower but silent and wake-free, perfect for ambushes. Early versions were plagued by reliability issues, and some even circled back to hit the U-boat that fired them. A single U-boat could carry up to 14 torpedoes, but with only 4 to 6 tubes ready to fire, every shot had to count. The results were catastrophic. Entire convoys torn apart in the middle of the ocean. Ships burning with no land in sight. Survivors floated for days, if they were lucky enough to be picked up at all. By 1941, the U-boat campaign had gone from dangerous to existential. In a single year, over 6 million tons of Allied shipping were sent to the bottom. Britain's survival hung by a thread. But the cat-and-mouse game was just beginning. By mid-1940, Britain reintroduced the convoy system, bundling merchant ships into heavily guarded formations. Dönitz countered with his wolf pack tactic, coordinating groups of submarines to attack from multiple directions simultaneously, overwhelming the escorts. The back and forth escalated. When U-boats attacked at night on the surface, the Allies developed compact radar to detect them. When they went deep, the Allies improved sonar. When they traveled in packs, the Allies created hunter-killer squadrons to track them down. By early 1943, a fully developed system of countermeasures had transformed the Atlantic into a killing ground for U-boats. May 1943, known as Black May to the German submarine service, saw 43 U-boats destroyed in a single month. That is a staggering 25% loss rate. With each U-boat carrying around 50 men, the human cost was unimaginable. Admiral Dönitz, shocked by the losses, temporarily withdrew most U-boats from the Atlantic. They never fully recovered. Allied anti-submarine warfare had evolved through painful trial and error. The earliest weapon was the depth charge, essentially a barrel of explosives set to detonate at a specific depth. Early versions could only be rolled off a ship's stern. Later came forward throwing weapons like the Hedgehog, a multiple spigot mortar that fired 24 small charges ahead of the ship. When a depth charge went off close enough, the shockwave could rupture the hull, damage internal systems, or force the submarine to surface. At close range, it could crush a U-boat completely. But it was not just surface ships turning the tide. Aircraft became deadly submarine hunters. Modified bombers equipped with radar, searchlights, and depth charges patrolled vast ocean areas. By 1943, a U-boat could no longer surface anywhere in the Atlantic with confidence. The technological advantage had shifted decisively to the Allies. The hunters had become the hunted. But what made serving on a U-boat truly horrific was not just the danger outside. It was what happened inside. Patrols could last up to 12 weeks. As missions dragged on, conditions deteriorated from uncomfortable to unbearable. Air quality was perhaps the most immediate challenge. Early U-boats lacked effective air purification. After about 24 hours underwater, headaches began. Things could get dangerous quickly. Later models had some air purification, but they remained inadequate for extended submersion. In just 50 cubic meters of habitable space, around 50 men were crammed together. There were not enough beds for everyone. Crew members hot-bunked, sharing beds in rotating shifts. Only the captain had private quarters, barely larger than a closet. Men lived on top of one another, with bunks tucked between torpedoes and machinery. Food began reasonably well, but after a couple weeks, it was mostly biscuits and preserved meat. Fresh water was strictly limited to about 2 gallons per man per day for all purposes. Bathing became a distant memory. Men went weeks without washing. In the humid, enclosed space, This led to painful skin infections known simply as U-boat ROT. Sailors joked that submarine crews could be smelled before they could be seen. Beyond physical discomfort loomed the constant awareness that death could come instantly and in terrifying forms. Battery malfunctions could release toxic gases that, in the confined space, could quickly become fatal. When hunted, U-boats would dive deep and go silent, cutting engines to avoid detection. In the sudden quiet, crews could hear the ping of enemy sonar searching for them, followed by the splash of depth charges being dropped into the water. Then came seconds of agonizing waiting before the explosions. Depth control mechanisms, if damaged, could send the submarine into an uncontrolled dive beyond its crush depth. Crews had a name for it, a death dive. The boat would start descending, slowly at first, then faster. Everyone on board knew exactly what was happening. The deeper you go, the more water pressure multiplies. Once you pass the depth your craft was designed for, it is just a question of when the hull will fail. And when it does, it is over in an instant. A silent implosion, flattening everything in milliseconds. The crew could try to recover by blowing the ballast tanks and attempting to level out, but if something had already gone wrong, the chances were slim. There is perhaps an even worse option than implosion. At least that agony is instant. In shallower waters, some U-boats sank to the seabed and were not instantly crushed. Crews waited in the dark without power, with no way out. Oxygen slowly ran out. Or worse, if water was leaking in, they would wait for it to reach the ceiling. That is what every crew feared most. Not enemy fire, but being dragged down alive, trapped in a steel coffin in an unstoppable descent into nothing. Fire was another constant hazard. You were crammed between torpedoes, fuel, and batteries. Trying to put out a fire while underwater is not as easy as it sounds. The boat was divided into tight compartments, each sealed by pressure hatches designed to contain flooding or fire. But those doors worked both ways. If a fire broke out in one section and the doors had to be sealed, anyone left behind was trapped. This is why 3 out of every 4 U-boat crewmen never made it home. Of the 859 U-boats that set off on war patrols, 648 were lost. That is a 75% casualty rate. Of those lost, 429 yielded no survivors. Even more shocking, 215 U-boats were lost on their first patrols, usually before Green crews had learned the ropes or inflicted any damage on Allied shipping. Herbert Werner, a U-boat captain, called his memoir Iron Coffins. He was not exaggerating. Allied air power, improved tactics, code breaking, and overwhelming industrial production turned what started as a weapon of terror into a death sentence for those who crewed them. The U-boat service had the highest casualty rate of any branch of the German military during World War II. Higher than the infantry on the Eastern Front. Higher than the Luftwaffe. These men lived in constant fear, in unbearable conditions, knowing that statistically they probably would not survive. And most of them did not. This was the reality of life aboard a German U-boat. Not glory, not honor, just steel walls closing in, darkness, suffocation, and the knowledge that the ocean floor might be your final destination. If you'd like to see more stories like this, consider subscribing. If this story meant something to you, leave a like and share your thoughts below.